Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a great pleasure to take a call in the second reading of the Reserves and Other Lands Disposal Bill, and I do so as the previous Minister for Land Information, but also as the National Member of Parliament based in Dunedin, and for whom the three issues that this bill relates to, based in the Dunedin area, are very important. And I want to take issue with both Mr Prosser and Ms Sage on somehow this inference that this bill is before us because the government is running out of work to do. Well, I suggest that quite the opposite is the case, and I, as the Minister, was working very hard with the Leader of the House in what was a very crowded legislative program in the lead up to the 2014 election to bring this bill back and have it passed into law. There are some very important things, and Mr Prosser and his party seek to have the bill dismissed. Well, that'll make him welcome at the Port Chalmers Bowling Club, I'm sure. They'll be buying drinks for him, and certainly the members of the Taieri Airfield, who are very keen to ensure that the changes being made through this bill are passaged in a timely manner. And indeed, they have been lobbying me, well, in a more timely manner. And I think Mr O'Connor did articulate the problem that has been faced by successive Ministers of Land Information insofar as the bill is intended to be non-controversial, and there were a couple of matters that were quite the opposite. Mr Parker, and as the architect of the bill, I would make no criticism about that, because those matters did become apparent after the bill's introduction. And I want to acknowledge and congratulate my friend and colleague, the very smart Jackie Dean, member for Waitaki. Mr Prosser has mentioned, but others may not be aware, that the issues around Lookout Point have been dealt with through a local bill brought to this House by that hard-working member for Waitaki, because of the importance that the Waitaki District Council and the people of Oamaru placed on that issue. So I presume that Minister Upston will be bringing an SOP in the committee stage to have the relevant clauses 18 to 20 removed, because indeed the effect of that has already been made thanks to that local bill. But I do want to turn to the issues related to matters in the Greater Dunedin area, and in particular the Octagon. I think the matter is important to the Port Chalmers Bowling Club in respect of the Recreation Reserve and their ability to be able to formalise the leasing arrangements with the Dunedin City Council, but I dare say they won't be building statues of Louise Upston down the main street of Port Chalmers anytime soon, or any National MP for that matter. But they might be building statues in the Octagon. Well, Mr Parker raises a very good question about the Star Fountain. Built before I was born, and when that member was in nappies, I think about 1963. But actually, in order to tell that story, one needs to go back to the very early stages of the establishment of Dunedin City. And in 1854, in fact, the Dunedin Public Lands Ordinance proclaimed that it, quote, shall not be lawful to erect any building whatever within or upon the centre area of the square called Moray Place. And of course, Moray Place shrouds what we now know as the Octagon. And it was a barren piece of land for about 10 years, even after the gold money came rushing into the city in 1861. Bell Hill was a barrier between the Exchange and the Octagon that really prevented the Octagon from being the true spiritual centre of the city that Charles Kettle envisaged. So when, through hammer and sickle, the Bell Hill was cut through, creating a passage not only through the Octagon but joining effectively the city together with one main street, the Octagon then became that centre of the city. Now, despite that ordinance, it appears to have been completely ignored for over 100 years, in fact, because Cargill's monument was first erected, and then when the central carriageway was erected, the monument itself was moved south to the Exchange. But of course the Burns statue then fast followed, and other structures in complete breach of, firstly, the Dunedin Public Lands Ordinance and then the reserves legislation that was passed in 1957, which confirmed the prohibition on the erection of buildings or other structures. So they didn't have to be buildings. Now, thanks to an endowment, I think, from the Star Fountain was erected in 1963, cost about £5,000 in the old money. And I'm sure Mr Parker and other Dunedin MPs that grew up in Dunedin have fond memories of heading along there on a Friday night watching the display of the fountain and the magnificent colours to the tune of the Waltz of the Flowers, I think it was. Now, in Mayor, one of the, I'm trying to remember when it was, but probably in the early 1990s, when the last big renovation of the Octagon was done, the Star Fountain was taken away, a stage was erected. And it was intended to be a permanent structure. But this 1957 legislation that this bill intends to remedy prevented that structure from becoming permanent. And years after it was built and became the centre of plenty of events, I think the Christmas lights would be switched on from that stage and so on. The council was required, or took it upon themselves, to de-erect that structure because it was in breach of the present 1957 legislation. So this bill changes that. And that's actually very important. I have had approaches from those city leaders who are in charge of the commemorations of World War I, the World War 100 committee down there, and they have a plan, as yet not funded, but I'm hoping that they will be able to raise some funds to create a statue of a soldier and his mother looking towards the Dunedin railway station down Lower Stewart Street. They've got a very elaborate structure planned, but it would be unlawful to erect that structure in 2017 or 18, as they hope to do, unless this legislation is passed. So I challenge Mr Prosser and his New Zealand First Committee to come back to this House during the committee stage and say why this is so trivial and unimportant to the people who are affected by it, including in Dunedin, that it should be dismissed. Because certainly the Taieri Airport stakeholders have been on at me, and probably many other Dunedin-based MPs, to have those changes made, and indeed I was talked out of creating or following the clever thinking of Ms Dean in creating a local bill because of the undertaking that we had that this bill would be passed now that the controversial features of it have been removed. So I want to acknowledge John Bizet, probably the longest serving Dunedin City Councillor, and his advocacy to get this thing through, and his colleagues. I also think that the stakeholders in the Winton Racecourse, the Braemar Hospital, the Wairau Hospital, and the many other benefits that will come out of this bill when passed will create. I hope that we can have it. They've probably stacked up a few other reserves issues around the country in the time since this one was last fashioned, and I do hope that we can get back to that cycle of passing one of these in a reasonably more timely manner every parliament or two. But these are important matters to local communities, and I support it. I'm pleased to see it up. I'm looking forward to its passage, and I commend it.
The question is, Nick, if I